worried about you. It's okay. The book came out a while ago. Things are fine. That was the effect I was going for.
Right,
So.
right. Well, I mean, like Suzanne, I don't know how to say her last name.
Or Cahalan. Yeah, I actually don't know, and I've met her multiple
times. I always want
times.
to say Callahan.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, that's what sounds me, but her book was so immersive. You know, like her Month of Madness. Just really did a great job.
Good afternoon. It's 12 p.m.
Yeah. It was a huge model for me.
Yeah.
So hello, everyone. And again, good afternoon, all festival guests. The Festival of the Book invited the Women's Initiative to partner with them for today's panel, entitled, In Her Own Words, The Power of Women's Mental Health Narratives. My name is Beverly Adams, and I am the current chair of the Board of Directors of the Women's Initiative. The mission of the Women's Initiative is to provide women with effective counseling, social support, and education so they can transform life's challenges into positive change and growth. Our vision is that all women in our community will have access to innovative, effective, evidence-based mental health care. The Women's Initiative offers free access to outpatient and resilience services. We maintain walk-in and call-in options. TWI offers group sessions as well as individual sessions. For more information, please stop by our table located at the back there and take some of our print literature to learn more. We encourage you to go to our excellent website, of which we are very proud. Our board of directors is well represented today, and I'd just like to ask them to stand for a quick second. The women's Thank you very much. Now, back to the festival business. The Virginia Festival of the Book is a program of the Virginia Humanities. It is a statewide organization whose mission is to connect people and ideas to explore the human experience. Most festival events are free of charge, but not free to produce. Your support helps us to keep this incredible event going year after year. If you'd like to support the 2025 festival, you can give using one of the QR codes found in the back of your brochure. Speaking of support, I'd like to give a special thank you to the 2025 Virginia Festival of the Book's premier sponsor, Michelle and David Baldacci, who make this event possible. I ask you now to please silence your cell phones. Sometimes we forget, so please do that now. I also encourage you to be aware of your space, look around, and note all available exits. In the case of an emergency, our site coordinator, Nancy Damon, who is here someplace, will be on hand to provide assistance. And as always, if you see something, say something. At the conclusion of this panel, a bookseller will be on site with copies of the panelist books. Purchasing a book is a great way to support our authors, and as an added bonus, they will be available to sign a copy for you. Please consider that. So finally, we would like to note that festival authors and speakers represent themselves. They do not represent Virginia Humanities or the University of Virginia. And now, I am delighted to introduce to you the three authors of our panel. They're here today. First beside me is Suzanne Scanlon. Second is Jody Hobbs Hesler, and at the end there is Sarah LaBrie. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about them. Suzanne Scanlon's memoir, Committed on Meaning and Madwomen, is published by Vintage in the U.S. and Hachette in the United Kingdom. She is also the author of two novels, Her 37th Year and Index, and Promising Young Women. Her work has appeared in Granta, The Guardian, BOMB, Bomb, the Iowa Review, Electric Literature, Fence, Harper's Bazaar, Literary Hub, and The Believer, to just name a few. She teaches at the School of the Art Institute, Chicago. Next to her is Jody Hobbs Hesler. She is the author of the novel Without You Here, winner of the 2025 Independent Press Award for Literary Fiction and the story collection, What Makes You Think You're Supposed to Feel Better. She teaches at Writer House in Charlottesville, Virginia, writes and copy edits for Charlottesville Family Magazine, and serves as assistant fiction writer for the Los Angeles Review. On the far end is Sarah LaBrie. She is the author of No One Gets to Fall Apart, a memoir. This is a book that was the 2024 New York Times Notable Book and Editor's Pick, and a Best Memoir of the Year, according to NPR, Elle, and Esquire. Born in the Bay Area and raised in the 3rd Ward in Houston, Texas, she lives in Los Angeles, where she works as a TV writer. Now, how I'd like to start, and I think that one of the things that makes me so excited about the book festival is that the authors get to be here and we get to know a little bit more about them. What I've asked each of them to do is to tell us how they summarize their book. Often we think that we know what the author had intended, but in fact, they may have had a slightly different approach. So I'd like to hear how they summarize their book, and then I want them to read a section of their book and to tell us after that why they chose that particular section. So.
Hi there. Thank you, Beverly, so much for that. So my memoir, Committed, on Meaning and Madwomen, I like to say that it's a memoir about grief, reading, and mental illness, or mental health, another way to say it. And it tells the story of a period of acute crisis in my life when I ended up hospitalized in the New York State Psychiatric Institute. What was meant to be a kind of short stay turned into a period of many years. And so it tells that story. And I return to that story from my perspective now, and I write about the books I was reading then, the books I've read over the years, particularly those that help me understand my experience, make sense of my experience, and what they mean to me now, many years later, as a mother, as a teacher, and so on, to kind of revisit this time period. So I'll read the very opening section of the book. And this first section is called Return. It was a hot July day, many decades later, that I happened to be in New York. I was house sitting for a friend, spending a week in her apartment at 145th and Broadway. It was the closest I'd been in years to the hospital that had once been my home. One morning, I decided to walk north. My best days are those that I walk the city, unfettered and directionless, and so it took me a minute to understand where I was going. We are drawn back, aren't we? Even when we don't mean to be and don't want to be, the past is there, waiting for us. I walked the mile or so up Riverside Drive until I reached my once address, 722 West 168th Street. Of course, nothing in this city remains as it was, and this is no exception. The building with its grand architecture is no longer the home of the State Psychiatric Institute. This is where I lived, I want to say to someone as I point up to the 5th floor, but who would care? In the archway over the entrance, I can read the original name of the building, the Gothic lettering etched in stone, New York State Psychiatric Institute and Hospital. These are the vestiges for which I'm grateful. Another vestige, the 2 stone benches out front, one etched with the Roman numeral, the year of the building's founding. Just a year or so after I left for good, the State Psychiatric Institute moved into a new building, larger and grander than the original, with a walkway crossing Riverside Drive toward a second building, which looked out to the Hudson River. By then, the program was defunded. No longer would anyone live there as long as we did. I find the Department of Records. I ask a woman at the desk about the old building, the state hospital connected with the Presbyterians of Columbia University, the institute referred to as the PI. She looks at me flatly, uninterested. Yes, she says, that's the old PI. I tell her I'd like to get copies of my medical records. Were you an inpatient? Yes. When? A long time ago. How long ago? 20 years ago, I realize as I say it. She considers, then explains the process of retrieving records. There are forms to fill out, money to pay, permissions for release. Once this is approved, the papers will be copied. You'll receive those copies in the mail. I fill out the paperwork, pay with my credit card. It's nearly a year later. I've almost forgotten when I receive a packet of 10 or 15 pages, a summary of my stay, a stack of narratives, really. Different doctors write different summaries. Each doctor has his or her particular angle. Did I think it would be objective? No, but I hadn't realized how subjective it would be. These character descriptions have much in common with the writing of the students in my creative writing classes. There are consistencies, recurring themes, dysthymia used over and over again. I was told I had chronic depression or major depression or bipolar disorder, but this is the diagnosis repeated throughout. I was disappointed by the stack of papers, which I put away in a drawer. On the one hand, these pages bring up the great shame I feel for the waste of those days, the extent of my objection. At the same time, I wanted more, daily notes or details that could fill in the gaps in my notebooks, in my memory. I want the details. I don't want the official language, the Axis 1 or Axis 2, the list of medications and symptoms. What I want is the story of our long, dull days and years in that hospital. Those days, those years, it is the quotidian I want to recover. Thank you. And I chose that section. I mean, it's the beginning, but it's also, I began there because I feel like, I wanted to set up the quest of the book. The frame of the book is sort of who I am now or who I was when I wrote this book. I decided to return to this moment in my past and the kind of question of it, of what was I doing, what was the story. And I do have these notebooks, which I go to in the book, and again, which are not very helpful in the way that the medical records are not very helpful. So the project of the memoir becomes about trying to tell that story and use these pieces of the archive, of my own archive, and other material and other women's stories to put this together for myself. And it's also, I wanted to use that walk, kind of just the physical walk to this space, to the building, because the building, the outside of the building, the architecture that can't be erased becomes this motif and this sort of recurring motif throughout the memoir itself. So thank you.
Well, first I want to thank everyone for having us here. It's really wonderful to have you all with us today. My book of the three is the only fictional one, so I'm going to say that and probably remind you, this is not my story. When we write fiction about topics that are outside our experience, they usually are an amalgamation of experiences we have some like Venn diagram overlap with, so there's different parts of my life and people I'm close to and people I've known over the years that kind of pooled into creating characters who were different from me. I wanted to clarify that out front. So the novel is really about the close relationship between Noreen and her aunt Noni. They're both a little bit of outliers in their family. They're alike in their whimsy. They're alike in their sense of being different from other people. They even share physical features and some mannerisms. When Noni dies from suicide, when Noreen is a child, the repercussions are like a pebble into a puddle, kind of going through her life. So there's grief because she was very close to this aunt. They shared a special connection, but there's also the expectation in the family that she will follow the same path because they are so alike and because there is sort of an unspoken family history that sort of hangs around like a shadow. So there are the point of view switches between Noreen and her aunt, and it moves around in time, but the main arcs of time are the last few months of 1999 and the last few months of Noni's life. In 1999, the more present arc, Noreen is now the same age her aunt was when she died, and she's the mother of a small child and she's in an increasingly dangerous marriage that's isolating her. And she's kind of at this crossroads where she has to face, is she going to fulfill her family's worries, or does she get to write a new story for her family? So I'm going to read a section that happens. So because it moves around in time, there are titles for each section that reference where it falls in time and where that time is in reference to Noni's loss. So this is November 1989, which was 9 years after. So we're with Noreen now. She's in high school. She has a friend that she's kind of sort of stuck with, I would say. That's not the best friendship. And Claudia, her friend, likes to pretend she's in college, so she'll hang out at the college library to do her homework, and always ends up like getting double dates with frat boys for her and Noreen, who really finds it kind of boring. So she's out on one of these dates, kind of feeling really annoyed, and they're walking along some train tracks when a train comes, and we're picking up with Noreen right after she has dashed in front of the train as just a thrill, and freaked out her friends. So they're on the other side of the train, and she's on the other. And this, I'll tell you more why I picked it after it's over. The farther the train goes, the faster it goes. Clackety-clacks and tossed pebbles and fallen leaves churn around her along with the smell of grease and dirt. She sits on a rock beside the tracks, kicks at an empty bottle of Mad Dog 2020 and a tattered page ripped out of some porn magazine. It's a cargo train. She loses count after the 37th car. Her laughter works its way from thrilled to thready, shapes itself into tiny ice pellets that needle through her veins. The shivers, like that thing that happened to Noni, that knocked her out of herself, buckled her to the ground, washed her face with a look of death. Noreen keeps her seat. No one knows what's happening as long as she holds her body tight and concentrates. It's like Noni, but not like her at the same time, like everything about Noreen. She closes her eyes, feels the train shuddering past, the chill of its wind, as if each sensation whirls up from inside her. She waits for the rush to dissipate. Sometimes her mother checks on her in a particular way, a telltale expression on her face, or a strange time to ask if she's okay. Noreen can tell when she's worried Noni will steal her away one day. Their distinctive samenesses, like one long seduction. Their eyes, their hair, their tendency to get lost in thought. Why wouldn't Noreen get the attacks too, the intrinsic despair? When her mother calls her Noni by mistake, her face freeze frames, hoping Noreen hasn't noticed, or at least that she won't take a deeper meaning from the slip. But Noreen always notices, and that deeper meaning has hung between them like a wraith since Noni died. Will you become her? Will she? Noreen grips her arms to her sides and balls into herself on the back of the cold rock. She breathes fast breaths between her teeth in the rhythm of the Friday the 13th movie soundtrack. Chi-chi, ha-ha, chi-chi, ha-ha. Holding herself tighter and tighter. She has to wait it out. Hopes it'll end before the train does, before Claudia and the preppy boys freak at the sight of her and bother her with their questions and fears. Thank you. And I picked that one because central to the story is the idea that she's struggling with some of the same things that her aunt struggled with. She's also struggling with the inability to really tell her family about it because their worry is so strong. It gets in the way of her being open about it and being able to kind of deal more openly with what's happening. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. My book is No One Gets to Fall Apart. It is a memoir about the year that my mom was diagnosed with late onset schizophrenia, which also happened to be the same year that a book that I had been working on for 5 years kind of ran aground and just disintegrated in my hands, and I had no backup plan career-wise. And one of my oldest friends abruptly ended our friendship after an incredible moral betrayal. And I had just reached this point where I felt like I need to figure out what's going on and why all of this is happening, or I'm going to die. And the book came out of that sort of incredible seismic year, and ended up, the process of writing it, the process of my mom's breakdown, wound up throwing into really sharp relief a lot of the secrets that my family had kept about my mother's behavior when I was a child, about my grandmother, that I kind of found myself forced to confront. And so the book is about that process. And I'll just read from the beginning. In March 2017, my grandmother in Houston calls me in Los Angeles to tell me my mother was recently found on the side of the freeway, parked, honking her horn, her car filled with notes in which she outlined federal agents' plans to kill her. In the car was a receipt for bottled water from George Bush Intercontinental Airport, over an hour away. Later, we learned she spent the day there, terrified she was going to be murdered, hoping if something happened, it would be caught on a security camera. Actually, my grandmother informs me, my mother has been saying cars driven by sunglasses-wearing white men have been chasing her down the highway since February. The number started at 10, then rose to dozens, then to hundreds. She called and wrote notes to my grandmother's friends and colleagues, to neighbors, to strangers, detailing her persecution, leading the police to appear more than once at her home. At times, my mother was so afraid she slept in her car, not going inside to shower or change. She was fired from her nursing job after she drowned her work laptop in the bathtub. She purchased cameras to take pictures of the people following her, then threw the cameras away. She took my Aunt Tina on walks through the neighborhood and pointed out all the white cars. See, she said, how they all have their lights on in the daytime. My aunt tried to tell her the lights were a feature of the cars and not an element of some conspiracy, but my mother did not believe her. She was committed to the psychiatric ward at Bayshore Medical Center, a hospital outside the city. The hospital called Aunt Tina, who called my grandmother, who tried to get her released the following morning, but was not allowed to see or speak to her. Nurses injected her with medication that put her to sleep for 48 hours. When she woke up, she called my grandmother and asked, "What happened? Who said someone wanted to kill me?" My grandmother and Aunt Tina told her the truth, which was that nobody aside from my mother herself believed anyone wanted to kill her. Since coming home from the hospital, my grandmother tells me, my mother is back to normal and looking for a new nursing job. She blames the Houston traffic and the onset of menopause. She says the psychiatrist who released her diagnosed her as severely depressed. I hang up, awash in guilt, open the calendar on my phone, and try to remember what I was doing for the nights she was in the hospital and I didn't know. A friend directed a Schubert performance by the Los Angeles Philharmonic that I wanted to go to, but ultimately skipped in favor of working on the novel I'd been trying to finish for years. I was home writing and feeling bad about not going to the symphony, while my mother was in a car on the side of the highway, begging someone to save her life. I remember an odd phone conversation with her the week before last. She called to apologize for something she once said that hurt me. It was the first time we'd spoken in a while, and that phone call, combined with this new information, suggests conclusions I don't feel quite ready to accept. I'll stop there. And I read this section, one, because this was sort of the moment that I actually started in real time to write the book. I think that those opening couple of pages basically stayed the same through years of revision. And because I've been shocked by the number of people who, after reading that, have come to me and said, oh, this happened to, my cousin, my uncle, my mother, my grandmother. It's wild to me how the symptoms are always so similar. So in some ways, as this book was coming together and as I was getting those reactions, even from people at my publishing company, my reps, it started to feel really important to spread the word that this is a disorder and it always looks like this, even though when it's happening, it feels so isolating and you think it's your loved one and you are the only person it's ever happened to.
I've read all three books, and so I've noticed some themes that seem to carry out. They're different, but there are themes that I think flow through all three. And the first theme I'm going to talk about, or ask them to speak to, is friendships. We hear that to enhance our mental health, that it's important for us to have friendships. But what does that really mean? And in these three books, friendships are treated differently, and I'd like each of the authors to speak to that. So we'll start with you, Jody, this time, and come the other way.
All right, thank you. Friendship does feature a lot in this book. So both the characters have some healthy friendships and some unhealthy friendships. Noreen, like I mentioned in the section that I wrote, kind of got stuck with this one friend who doesn't bring a lot of joy to her life and kind of complicates things. But in college, she does make a friend that brings the good out of her. That gets complicated when that friend kind of picks up on the red flags with the eventual husband that Noreen chooses, and that her friend's ability to kind of have more clarity about what his character is like than she does puts pressure on that friendship. So it can be hard when you're battling different mental health challenges, and this relationship kind of created some mental health challenges. So it can be hard when people see it and you don't. It can complicate the friendship. So. And Noni has a good friendship with a neighbor who has PTSD, and so his symptoms are a little bit like hers. He was a Vietnam vet, and their connection is pretty genuine. While the other people that she's associated with through work, she's in a job that doesn't feel like it represents who she is. So she's always kind of on the outside of that those friendships. So friendship does kind of get in there and complicate, sometimes complicate these characters' access to doing what's best for themselves. But sometimes it's the lifeline. So.
Yeah, I would say something similar for me. One of the big running storylines in my book is about a friendship breakup with a woman who I admired hugely, was incredibly envious of, had been my best friend from the first day of college, was the opposite of me in a lot of ways, really daring, kind of just took hold of the opportunities she wanted and made them hers, and she would always drag me behind her and make sure that wherever she went, I would also have that opportunity. And she made it possible for me, I think, to become a writer, to survive as a student at Brown, where I felt very isolated and really unhappy. And ultimately, she became a really successful writer, and that success seemed to break something in her quietly, and it distorted her view on the world. It led her to do some things that I felt were really outrageous, but I could not talk to her about them because in my family, we didn't talk about things like mental illness, we didn't talk about being hurt, we didn't talk about her feelings, and it was that wound up ending our friendship. And I felt so emotional about this person and about what had happened that I really doubted my ability to write in a nuanced, objective way about what had happened, to the point where I tried to pull that whole plot line out of the book, and not least because I was afraid of being sued, and my agent was also afraid I would be sued. But it didn't work. The whole book just fell apart because that envy and that desire and that love and the strength that I had gained from it and the loss was crucial, was just essential to everything that I wound up becoming. I couldn't take it out. I had to actually end up putting a lot more of this person into the book, and I think it made me wonder if sometimes we minimize our female friendships, and especially friendship breakups, and how important those can be and how painful, because I don't feel like I see that story out in the world a whole lot, and I don't know why, because I know that I'm not the only person who's experienced this.
Yeah, I feel like one reason I wrote this book is because of the friends I had and made in the hospital, and in fact I dedicated the book to them because at some point in my life I realized there was no way, it's not like, it was one of the most intense and meaningful experiences in my life. And it's not like college where you can have a college reunion and hope everybody comes back. I mean, after you're in a psychiatric hospital for a long time, the people, even if you try to stay in touch, everybody's lives are, quite perilous, and many of the people are not alive, and other, fates. So part of the, I think, joy of writing the book was returning to those friendships and bringing those alive again, and just writing those scenes of one or two friends in particular, because I don't think at the time, I would have said that those friendships made me happy in those days, but I think they did for sure, and that was a big part of how I got better and was able to move on and have other relationships. But I think it's very, I think there's a real sadness about it for me that couldn't be integrated into the rest of life, and that also has to do kind of with the stigma that comes with being hospitalized. I don't think that, people want to, you leave and you don't want to identify that way necessarily, and so, yeah.
Thank you. Another theme that I saw was secrets. And I had been thinking about this. I saw the movie Wicked, and I had seen the play, and you know that they talk about secrets that come to light. Also, I must admit that I am an afternoon soap opera person. So if you watch any soap opera, that anything that's a secret is going to come to light at some point. And I get a kick out of that, because I always say, you might as well tell the truth, because it's going to come out eventually. So there are secrets that go through these three books, and I'd like the authors to talk about them. Sarah, will you start first?
Sure. So my mother's breakdown may have been precipitated by something that happened when she was a teenager. Her father was found dead in a garage that he owned in Houston, and her mother, my grandmother, never spoke to her about it. She just came home one day and told my mother and my aunt that their dad was dead, and left for a business trip. And my mom, I found this out while I was writing the book, my mom went into her bedroom closet and stayed there for 24 hours. And I think in some ways she's still there. I think that the trauma kind of resonated over decades and decades and led to her mental break when she was in her 50s. And I didn't know that story. My grandmother had lived in a state of denial for a long time, even though my mom was a very troubled child. I had a really difficult childhood being raised by her as a single mom. I didn't know that my grandfather's death was a source of mystery. I had kind of been told, it was a suicide, but later I found out, maybe he was murdered. He was known as, it's so funny, I found his obituary and he was called, just a Houston businessman, but it's not clear what his businesses were. He may have been involved in the drug trade in Houston. And it's funny because, we were just this middle-class black family that had been in Texas for generations, and no one ever talked about any of this. And, when I asked questions about it, people were confused about why I was curious. And I don't know if that's maybe a specifically Southern thing. It feels like it to me, or a particularly middle-class thing, where to survive, and especially, as a black woman, my grandmother, who was an entrepreneur and had built a successful life for herself and her two daughters, had to live in this state of repression and not acknowledging these horrific things that had happened to her. I also found out that my grandmother had been beaten to within an inch of her life. She had to go to the hospital by my grandfather, and she had to get stitches. And then she came home while he was at work after that happened, got her two daughters, got all of her stuff, and moved into her cousin's house and just hid from him. And he chased her, he tried to get the girls back, there was a confrontation involving a butcher knife in a parking lot, all this stuff. And I had no idea. No one had ever told me. And it only came out because I was writing this book. So, I don't know. I don't know how. I know that my grandmother had to have secrets to survive, but ultimately the repercussions of those secrets were really damaging, I think, for my mother and for me.
I think in this hospital treatment program I was in, there was this idea like you're only as sick as your secrets, and this was in the 90s, and the book Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery was also started to be, part of the treatment. And this idea of people had, a lot of people who were presenting as depressed or mentally ill had these sort of traumas, right? And often it was sexual abuse or other kinds of abuse. So this is something that comes up throughout as I tell the story of this hospital. But I think, in my family, just on a very simple level, there was the secret of like mental illness or depression as being, just something you didn't talk about, and something that was, and it was shameful. And I think that, my mother had died when I was a girl, and I think the idea of, how utterly shattering or debilitating that was for me and for my brother, and the way that we kind of found our own destructive ways of sort of coping in that grief, and the larger family wanted to get on with it, and you weren't supposed to be weighted down by despair, right? And then, of course, my grandparents had come from Ireland, and my grandmother had, I found out again later from my aunt, was just stayed in bed all day. Like after her kids were born, she just regularly did that. And it was something, again, no one called it mental illness or depression or anything, but these were, this was just the story of, or even the idea of mental illness had to be a secret until somebody dared to say, I need help, and ask for help. And then a diagnosis happens and so on, so.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's interesting that for all the books that we're talking about, that there was this intergenerational element of secret keeping that prevented in this case, and it sounds similar in the other cases, sort of the matriarch level had some trauma visited upon it, and the matriarch in this story loses her brother to suicide when she's a child and never deals with it. And it makes her bitter when her daughter has a similar problem, and even more bitter when her granddaughter has a similar problem, because she just can't deal with the grief. So one person's inability to process something tragic turns into a secret that keeps them all from being able to heal from it. So it feels like a thread that kind of runs through them all.
So when I think about, and I don't know if I primed you all with this question, but I think about unconscious voices. These are, in the book, the characters speak to themselves, and we, the reader, know what the character is talking about, but the other characters don't get to hear that. They don't benefit from what's unconscious in one person's mind. And I often thought, I wish that person could have shared their feelings with those other people. Could you speak to that a little bit? I mean, I'd like that style of us, the readers, kind of knowing more about the story than the actual characters in your book. Can you kind of put that together for us? You want to think of it?
I'll let you, someone else start.
Anybody start.
I like it, but it's...
Sure. I really like this question. I was a really isolated kid. I was an only child, and I was a scholarship student at this private school where I was one of the only black kids. And so I spent a lot of time in my head, and I wasn't sad. I didn't feel lonely. It was just my natural state of being, and I think I developed a really strong internal narrative, and that's probably why I became a writer, to the point where I talk to myself probably more than I talk to other people. And I know that sometimes, when I was growing up, I would always be asked sort of gently by teachers and relatives I didn't see a lot, it was kind of implied that maybe I should take speech lessons because I do have a weird intonation. I'm not always the easiest to understand. I tend to speak really quickly sometimes. And so I did find that writing was a way to be understood without being questioned. And the really validating part of writing this book was being able to write down my story and have other people read it and understand it and not be sort of looking at me or trying to understand what I'm saying, but internalize the story on the page. And I had been trying to do that for 5 years before I wrote this book. I had been trying to write a novel, a campus novel about, I don't even know, time travel. I don't know. It was a very clear ripoff of The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which was not something I was able to admit to myself for a long time. And it just didn't work. It just didn't work, and it didn't work, and it didn't work. And then this book just poured out of me, and it was sort of an immediate thing where my agent was like, you know, this is the one. And then she was like, I can sell this. Like, she took it on the market, and it sold. And all of this stuff that I did not expect to happen at all, and that I had been dreaming of for this novel. And I think that's because this is the book that my internal voice wanted to write. Like, this was its truth, and it needed to manifest itself in the world in a concrete way.
And just another reminder that mine is fiction. So there's a few different rules that kind of dictate how you create like a subconscious narrative in a story. And one of the things I tell writing students all the time is that whenever possible, just say it out loud. You know, like say the wrong thing if you have to, whatever, make it messy because that's easier for the reader to access. So there are cases in this novel where Noreen sort of hears an absent voice of her aunt speaking to her, and it's intentionally unclear whether she's really being haunted or if this is just this sort of vestige of this very close relationship. And then there's another feature, like when she's getting deeper and deeper into this dangerous marriage with her husband, where, you know, she states what she wants, you know, in the text somewhere, and you're working through it, and he's kind of manipulated things a different way, and she'll say something like, well, I guess that's what I wanted. I guess that's what I really meant. And this kind of subconscious thought kind of sort of teaches you how that relationship is training her. But by and large in fiction, you have to make it messy, and you have to make people say it out loud as much as possible.
Yeah, I'll just say that I also write fiction, and I think that writing the scenes of this book from when I was young, like when I was, scenes around when my mom was dying especially, and then, you know, and having this distance from it, just being older, and, you know, I was able to access, I think, to be able to see, have that distance from myself, that I was able to really find comfort in almost like reparenting, remothering, writing this child character now and letting her have that thoughts, but also being there, sort of witnessing and knowing how limited and trapped I was in that, in just my youth and pain and lack of experience and so on. So there was a lot of discovery of that, and then a sort of metaphysical experience while I was writing it with these different selves, and even feeling like my mother was back with me, just recreating those scenes on the page. And that's part of the real joy of writing. That's why I keep writing, I think. Yeah.
Boy, fabulous answers. So thank you. And so at this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions for our authors. The things that you have been thinking about that you'd like to explore. Do we have someone running around with the microphone? Fabulous. Speak loudly, Mike.
First of all, I'd like to, this is a very meaningful panel for me personally, and we just ended a career as a psychotherapist, also professionally. And I had two questions, a question for Sarah and a question for Suzanne. For Sarah, I'll ask both questions.
92, yeah.
Okay, so it was right around.
Yeah, right in that shift.
But you sound like you were grateful for, am I right, for being able to stay so long and work so hard?
Yeah, there's that, for sure. Yeah, it's not one thing. I mean, there's things that were definitely messed up about it that I write about, but ultimately part of the discovery of the book was like, am I here writing this because I received care that many people don't get, right? And there were many good things about it, and I returned to it, as I said, because there was so much meaning in those years and in that time. So yeah, I am grateful, for sure.
Yeah, I was terrified of my family reading this book. I tried to keep it from them for so long, and they've approached it with an immense amount of grace. They've been wonderful. My mother can't read it. She's medicated in such a way that she's not able to sustain the attention that would be necessary to read it. She's in a group home. My grandmother refuses to read it because she thinks it would make her sad, but she posts about it on Facebook every day. She's told all her friends about it. She made all her friends come to my launch reading in Houston. She's probably responsible for half the sales, honestly. And my aunt, who also helped raise me, is my mom's younger sister. I remember saying to her, okay, when you read it, you have to promise you won't stop speaking to me. You can't. And she was like, I would never do that. I love you. I would never do that. And I think I just really needed to hear that. And she read it. She had some copy editing notes, some fact checking, but she's just been, she's been wonderful. Same with my husband. I left the manuscript out on the coffee table while I was copy editing. And I took my dog for a walk, and I came back, and he was reading it. And I was like, no, it's not ready yet. And because he's a huge source of strength for me, but my depiction of him is nuanced. And he's not, and our relationship is not perfect, and we're both flawed people, and I'm very honest about that. And he read it with a fine-toothed comb to make it better. He deepened his own character. He had no qualms at all about how he was represented, and he made the book so much better just doing a final pass, and I didn't expect any of that. So I would say if you are thinking of writing a memoir, writing about your family, go ahead and do it. I think you'd be surprised. I think they might even be grateful or happy for you that you are able to kind of find some coherence in your own story, because that's how my family has responded, thankfully.
I think we have a microphone.
Okay, hello. Thank you so much for your fabulous presentation, and Madam Moderator, for your excellent questions. I'm curious to know, of three authors, who are your critical readers that you rely on before you publish?
I have about 2 writer friends who are just key, who will read early drafts and did read for this and asked big questions that became, generative in terms of the revision. And then my editor was a great reader too, in terms of, a lot of the book happened in the revision and editing with her. So it always shifts. I don't have one person, but I do. They're always trusted writers. Yeah.
Yeah, I have extensive acknowledgments at the back of the book for the people that helped read the manuscript. It went through many years of revision and many entirely different versions. And I also wanted to mention that I did have a friend of mine who's a writer but also a licensed social worker went through the book and helped me create a Q&A at the end that would kind of be, you could use it for book clubs, but you could use it in a therapeutic setting or for families who might be struggling with this in their families. So it was important to me to get all of that right, to be as authentic as possible. So that's a whole other kind of read that this went through as well. So just wanted to pass that one along.
I'm really lucky to be part of a writing community in Los Angeles. It's the prose writing community there is pretty small, so we kind of all know each other, and we all write and work on our books together. And of those people, I would say Steph Chaw, who wrote a book called Your House Will Pay. That was a Young Lions Literary Award winner. She's a mystery writer. She did an amazing pass on this book for the mystery question of this, what happened to your mom? Why is she like this? She really helped me build that part out. Carmiel Banaski, who is a novelist, I can't remember what her book is called. It came out a while ago, but my book was originally called Everything You Love Will Disappear. And she was like, you can't call it that. Nobody will buy a book like that if they see it in a bookstore. It sounds like a curse. And so I'm really grateful for that, that she made me change the title. And J. Ryan Stradle, who is a regional writer, he writes about the Midwest. He did a kind of pass for just voices and commerciality. And I don't know why I'm blanking on the title of his first book. Oh, it's killing me. I don't know. Does anyone know J. Ryan? Anybody have any idea? Okay. Best-selling Minnesota writer. But yeah, just my friends in LA. And then some friends who are here. Henry Hoke, who is a novelist in his own right, is a friend from working at the Young Writers Workshop at UVA, and somebody whose writing I really admire. I think a lot of it is, even if my writer friends didn't do a pass on this book, just sort of watching them live their dreams and become the writers that they want to be over decades is the most meaningful thing, I think, that has contributed to my being able to publish this book.
I promise you I don't read it. The question is to the memoir writers. If it's going to make you happy, I'll use the mic. It's for the other people. I teach middle school. I can project. I'm good. Okay, thank you. A lot of authors have talked about their books as their babies. But as a memoir writer, when your book is published and you get negative reviews, which we all know are inevitable, how do you not feel personally attacked because it's someone being like, I don't like the way you wrote about your own life? And that's always stressed me out as, someone who's thought about writing something like that. How do you approach that?
I mean, I didn't get negative reviews. I know there are negative reviews on places like Goodreads and stuff, and I don't read those. It's really dangerous to go there as an author, but especially for a book like this. So, but I don't, the other reviews I have aren't negative, but it is always uncomfortable to read any review, because even if it's positive, if there's something, there's always something, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it's just hard to have a memoir out in the world, yeah. And so but it's a relief when it's out, because I don't have to do the work anymore. But it can be kind of jarring, yeah, when somebody's talking about your life, yeah.
Yeah, I've been lucky that all of the sort of professional critical reviews have been very good and very kind. I definitely do read the Goodreads reviews as a form of self-harm. Like, if I'm having too good a day, I'll look at my Goodreads. But luckily, I think for me, the most important thing was that the writing was good. I wanted it to feel like this is not me trauma dumping. This is a story for you, the reader. And luckily, most of the mean Goodreads reviews are like, I'm concerned for this person. Her decisions don't make any sense. I feel really sorry for her husband. Like, what is wrong with her? And like, that doesn't really hurt me, because I know. Like, I'm aware. I'm concerned for me too. I think the ones that do really get to me are just like, oh, she's such a victim. She blames her mom for everything, because I did really try hard to be nuanced about that and to make it clear that I don't see myself as a victim at all. I'm the one telling this story. I'm empowered. Lots of bad things have happened to me, but bad things happen to everybody, and let's have a conversation about that. So that's painful, but again, it's my fault for going to Goodreads in the first place. People are allowed to have their opinions.
Hi, thank you all so much. I'm Elizabeth Irvin, who's the Executive Director of the Women's Initiative with Beverly. I'm so grateful for each of you sharing your stories, writing fiction in such a nuanced way. I love the idea of the Q&A in the back for people to take this and learn and grow with it. I just want to say thank you.
At the Women's Initiative, we really do believe that writing is healing, and we have a lot of our therapists. Allison Davis comes to mind in particular, with a background in narrative therapy, that idea that you can transform challenge into change, you can transform healing into positive growth. I just didn't know if anyone wanted to speak specifically about whether that was an element. There's so much craft that you put into these writings, but it's also such a personal journey, even in the fiction. So I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that.
I'll randomly go first as the fiction writer. For me, as a fiction writer, I feel like the superpower that literary fiction has is its ability to engender empathy in the reader, which means no matter what the topic is, as long as you're getting at some emotional truth, you have the potential of reaching a reader who's maybe never seen either themselves or something they've struggled with written down anywhere outside of themselves. So it has this potential to unlock problems, or like unlock answers to questions that they've had, and it can kind of triangulate the experience. So something that they have gone through, if it's a character that's going through it, they can maybe then see that character as like someone who deserves compassion when maybe they'd been hard on themselves, or they can see the person who created the problem, and they can find some compassion for that character, and then have some ability to maybe make peace with something that they'd been struggling with for a long time. So it's for me in this case, every time I'm writing literary fiction, I'm writing towards some kind of connection like that with the reader.
Everything, I agree with that, the power of it, and I still love, however, like weird and strange what I'm writing about. I love that I'll meet people or talk to people who have similar experience or tell me their story, or someone in their family story, and so on. And even just on the simple level of, grief and mother loss, I continue to feel like it's very healing for me to write about, even though it was this thing that happened to me when I was 8. It continues to feel like the most important thing in my life, and as I said, it's a way of kind of reconnecting with my mom through writing her over and over again the rest of my life. Which is why this book wasn't meant to be about my mom, but it became about my mom because,
Yeah, I think when you're a child with a mentally ill mom, you lose trust in yourself in some ways because you don't know if your experience is universal or if it's particularly terrible or if everyone's mom is like that and there's something wrong with you that you're so sad all the time. And I think writing this book and having people be like, oh no, that was really messed up has been healing, because the truth, like the little girl version of the world is validated. That's shown to be true, and it's helped the adult version of me find some stability and some understanding of why I did certain things that I did when I was younger, and why my relationship with my mother was the way that it was. And that was really surprising for me, because I didn't write this book seeking catharsis. I wrote it because I had to, and then I wrote it again because I wanted to prove to myself that I could write this as a story for other people, for readers, and that was enough for me. I didn't expect that form of healing that came of the child version of me kind of getting her say.
So thank you to everyone for coming here today and coming out and being a part of this lively and smart panel discussion. You'll now have the opportunity to purchase books and have them signed by the authors. Our book signing table is to the rear here. So there is a room, I guess if you're familiar with the Jefferson School, the cafe, that's where the books can be purchased, and the authors will be in a room adjoining that. So please take the time to do that. Now before you go, we ask that you give feedback to this panel, on this panel to the festival. Your feedback helps ensure that we are offering the best programming possible to all our audience members. We ask that you please take a moment to complete our survey using the QR code in the back of your brochure. If you'd prefer a paper copy, our site coordinator, who is here someplace, will provide one for you. Each survey that you complete will enter your name into a drawing for a book signed by one of the festival authors or a letterpress print from our past festival events. Your participation is much appreciated. And finally, if you are staying for the next panel, we ask that you kind of allow time for the coordinator to take the authors to that room, and things can get set up for the next panel. Thank you again for attending today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your time.